The distress signal pierced through the diplomatic channels at 300 hours, shattering the fragile peace that had taken decades to establish between humanity and the Varthak species. Varrock, the towering predator leader whose reputation alone had ended wars, stood before the human research station with his hunting pack, every muscle coiled for violence. "My cubs are missing," he growled, his triple-jointed legs shifting in the aggressive stance that preceded bloodshed. "They were last seen near your facility." The station commander's face drained of color. The Varthak were apex predators from a death world where even the plants had evolved to kill. Their young were sacred, protected with a ferocity that made Earth's most territorial animals look docile. If the cubs had come to harm near human territory, the peace treaty would dissolve in fire and fury. "I'll wake Dr. Core immediately," the commander stammered. "She's our xenobiologist. She knows the surrounding ecosystem better than anyone." Varrock's clawed hand tightened around his plasma rifle. "You have 1 hour before I assume the worst." Dr. Liana Core stumbled out of her quarters, still pulling on her jacket. She'd been analyzing genetic samples until midnight, trying to understand why the local fauna seemed inexplicably drawn to human settlements. The irony wasn't lost on her now as she faced down an 8-foot predator, whose species had evolved to hunt in packs and take down creatures twice their size. "Varrock," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Describe the cubs. Age, markings, any distinguishing features?" The predator leader's eyes, all three of them, narrowed. Most species cowered before him. This human stood her ground, clipboard in hand, as if this were merely another research problem to solve. 2 cubs, 43 days old, male and female. The female has a white patch on her left haunch. They wandered from the den during sleep cycle. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, betraying the terror beneath his fury. "They've never left the den before. They don't understand danger yet." Liana's mind raced. 43 days. That was roughly equivalent to a 3-month-old human infant in terms of development. Curious, mobile, but utterly defenseless. She thought about the heat signatures she'd noticed on her equipment lately, the small disturbances in her lab's climate control system. "Come with me," she said suddenly. "Alone. Your pack will frighten them if they're where I think they are." Varrock's translator implant struggled with the concept. "You want me to enter a human structure alone? While my cubs are missing?" The threat was implicit. "You could be leading me into a trap." Liana met his gaze without flinching. "Your cubs don't know to be afraid of me yet, but they'll know their father's scent. If they're scared and hiding, a hunting pack will make them bolt. Trust me or waste your hour." The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Varrock dismissed his pack with a gesture and followed the human into the research station. Liana led him through the sterile corridors to her personal quarters, a space strictly off-limits to non-essential personnel. She pressed her finger to the biometric lock and the door slid open with a soft hiss. "Stay quiet," she whispered, "and lower your body temperature if you can. You're radiating aggression." Varrock's translator nearly glitched on that phrase. How could a human sense his thermal state? But he followed her instruction, engaging the meditation techniques that lowered his predatory signature. The quarters were small by Varthak standards, barely large enough for a proper nest. Liana's workstation dominated one corner, screens displaying endless streams of genetic data. Her sleeping area was a simple human bed with what appeared to be excessive padding and soft materials. And there, in the center of that bed, curled against Liana's discarded jacket, were 2 tiny Varthak cubs. Varrock froze. His cubs were not just sleeping. They were draped across the jacket like it was their mother's warmth, their small chests rising and falling in the deep rhythm of secure, peaceful sleep. The female cub had her tiny claws hooked into the fabric. The male was making the soft, chirping sounds that indicated contentment and safety. "I found them 3 nights ago," Liana said softly, crouching beside the bed. "They'd squeezed through a ventilation shaft. They were cold and scared. I didn't know whose they were. I thought they might be from the wild population we've been studying." She reached out slowly, and Varrock's instinct screamed at him to intercept, to protect his vulnerable young from the predator that was. The female cub stirred, nuzzled against Liana's hand, and went back to sleep. "They come every night now," Liana continued, her voice filled with wonder. "They wait by the vent until I go to bed. Then they curl up right here. I've been monitoring their vital signs, making sure they're healthy. I was going to report it this morning, but She looked up at Varrock. I didn't want to lose them. The predator leader's world tilted on its axis. His species had studied humans for years, cataloging them as clever but weak, lacking natural weapons or armor. They'd never understood why humanity had spread so far, conquered so much, inspired such loyalty from other species. Now, looking at his cub sleeping peacefully on a human's chest, treating her scent as safety rather than threat, Varrock began to understand. How? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They're taught to fear anything not Varthak. It's instinct. Liana smiled, stroking the female cub's soft fur. Maybe, but I think there's another instinct. The one that recognizes care, warmth, protection. Your cubs were cold and lost. I made them warm and safe. Everything else, she shrugged. Everything else is just details. Varrock slowly knelt beside the bed. His cubs stirred at their father's familiar scent, chirping excitedly. But they didn't flee from the human. Instead, the female reached out with one tiny paw, touching both Liana's hand and Varrock's claw, bridging the gap between species with the innocent certainty of youth. The treaty, Varrock said finally, was negotiated through fear, through respect for each other's capacity for destruction. Yes, Liana agreed. Perhaps that was the wrong foundation. Liana looked at the cubs, then at their father. Perhaps it was. As dawn broke over the research station, a hunting pack waited outside, confused by the absence of violence. Inside, a predator leader sat beside a human xenobiologist, watching his cubs sleep peacefully between them, and wondered if his species had finally encountered something more powerful than fear. They had encountered love. And it was terrifying.